Story. Joining me now to take your questions on the issue is Joe Moreno, and Joseph is a former federal prosecutor. He joins me from Washington once again tonight. Joe, good to see you again.
Hi, Carol. Always great to be with you.
First of all, what do you make of John Bolton being asked to appear before the inquiry?
So, Carol, keep in mind that, all of these reports that we hear about what has been testified to, we're not really supposed to know this, right? Because all of this so far has been done in closed depositions. So what we're hearing, we have to always take with a grain of salt. That being said, though, if the reporting is accurate, what it sounds like is that basically the Democrats in the House are building the argument that something was wrong here, that something was wrong in how President Trump was dealing with Ukraine. And don't take their word for it. Actual people in the administration raised concerns. So what I think they're doing is they're going up the chain. They're saying, okay, the first person who had a concern, who did he or she raise it to? What did they do with it? And ultimately, I think what they're going to say is, did these concerns make it to President Trump's level? So that's why I think what we're seeing is they're going up the chain. And if Ambassador Bolton, if and when he does appear, he will be the highest ranking person so far who's being asked to testify.
He says he won't appear, or his lawyer, Charles Cooper, says he won't appear without a subpoena.
Yeah, I mean, that's typical. It's very common in these investigations for first it to be a voluntary request for a person to come in, and then if the person does not show up, a subpoena is issued. That becomes a lot more dicey, because then if the person refuses to show, it goes to court, and the courts will most definitely side in the favor of Congress to say, you know what, Congress has the right to hear from these people and hear what they have to say.
All right, let's take some of our viewer questions tonight. Gavin sent this one in on CBC.ca. I'm wondering what's illegal about asking for an investigation of corruption.
Hey, Gavin, good question. I think we're going to hear something along the lines of that kind of argument, when it comes time for the president to defend himself. There's nothing wrong with asking for corruption. And in fact, corruption is a perfectly good reason for a president to withhold foreign aid. I think the problem that President Trump is going to run into, though, is that he doesn't have a record of going around and asking about corruption in anywhere else except for the very specific request from Ukraine to look into this particular company, Burisma, where Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, worked. So I think that in a perfect world, sure, asking about corruption and tying the release of military aid to finding out about corruption is perfectly legit. But when it comes to a very specific request, which, by the way, could possibly help someone in a presidential campaign next year, I think that argument falls apart pretty quickly.
All right. Next is a question from Odesh. Have a listen.
The Democrats will not get the votes, number one, and it could backfire. Because if the Senate is controlled by Republicans, my question is, how smart is it going down the road of impeachment?
Joseph, want to take that on?
I mean, good question, right? I mean, that's a pure political question. So the Democrats, they obviously feel strongly about this case. And I think what they feel is that as they get the information out and ultimately will go to public hearings, I think they believe that public opinion will turn, that people will say, you know what, this is serious and I'm not happy about this. And maybe they'll even turn some Republicans in the Senate who will ultimately vote to remove President Trump from office. Next best case is they rough up President Trump to the extent that he's not able to get reelected next year. But, your viewer is right, though. If they overreach, it could be seen as, they're making a mountain out of a molehill. If people don't think that this is serious enough to remove a president, which is something that has never happened in this country, then it could backfire on them. And we kind of saw that with President Clinton in the 90s, who did commit wrongdoing, but the majority of Americans felt it was not to the level of removing him from office. And ultimately, it kind of backfired on Republicans back then.
Yeah, a lot of questions around this very thing. I'm going to go straight into our next question from Jonathan. Let's take a listen.
So what I want to know is why this Republican Party won't stand up to this president. It's obvious, it's clear as to how he's towed the line. And at this point, I can't understand why they aren't doing anything. Like, what is it going to take?
Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, I get that a lot, right? I mean, I I have to think, in my opinion, it's a matter of pure political survival. Right? I mean, keep in mind that even though President Trump lost the popular vote 3 years ago, he had the strongest electoral college result of any Republican since Ronald Reagan in 1988. He won states that no Republican has won since then. And so I think the Republican Party feel that if they turn on him and his core base of supporters feel that they were not loyal to him, the party will fall apart. So I have to think it is a matter of rank survival at this point. They feel they would rather stick with him and kind of see where it goes than turn on him and what they feel is just going to be a disaster in the polls next year.
Here's a question from Daniela.
Just curious as to how serious is this impeachment process? We saw it with Bill Clinton, and we have seen this before. They've threatened for it with the Democrats, so just want to know how serious they are about it.
Joseph?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Daniela, it's a good question. I think it's pretty serious. I mean, I've been on record several months ago when it was the Russia probe and Robert Mueller we were talking about, and I said I don't think the president will get impeached. I just don't think that it resonated enough with people that they felt it was serious enough, and I think the Democrats were not going to bring that case to impeachment. I think it's different here. I think the matter is much more understandable. It happened only a few months ago, and I think that there's not a great defense to it. So I do think they're serious. Now, where it goes, that's another question, but I think it's very likely before the end of this calendar year the president does get impeached.
Okay. We know Congress is going to vote tomorrow to establish the rules of the impeachment proceedings. What can you tell us about that and how that's going to further the process?
So basically, what they're going to do is they're going to set out the parameters of what we're going to see play out over the next few weeks and months. It's an 8-page resolution. It's not super complicated. It basically says we're going to have open hearings, so no more of these closed depositions. The minority will have certain rights to call their own witnesses, but only if the majority agrees. The president will have the ability to question witnesses like you would in sort of a criminal trial, and the existing transcripts of those who have been deposed will get released. So we'll get to know for sure what all these witnesses have been saying these past few weeks. No more surmising. So it'll basically lay out the process that we'll see, you know, if and when this impeachment does move forward.
Yeah, Ray is asking, will tomorrow's vote be the beginning of the end?
It's tough to say, Ray. I mean, I do think the Democrats are serious, but as it's been noted by viewers, the Republicans control the Senate, and it's a high threshold, right? It's 2/3 of the Senate, which means 67 out of 100 senators have to vote to convict. So I think impeachment, which is the first process, I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point. But where it goes after that, whether it goes to actual removal, I still think that's a very tough hill to climb, and unless things change very drastically, I think we're effectively going to see a stalemate, which is impeachment by the House, non-removal by the Senate, which is exactly where we were back in 1998 with President Bill Clinton.
And that means that the public will make up their mind in 2020 about what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's have our last question tonight from Tim.
Yeah, it's the entire process. It's why is it taking so long?
Yeah, well, we were on our way to answering that question. I think you gave us a pretty good idea of why it's a long process. But where does this process stop and the election begin?
Well, I mean, I think it seems like it's been going on a long time because we've been talking about some level of impeachment of this president for going on 2.5 years. But if you think about it, the Ukraine issue, 6 weeks ago, we'd never heard about this.
Right.
So I would say actually for Ukraine and what's happening right now in the House, it's actually going pretty quickly. Now, the calendar is a reality, though, and at some point we're going to hit Thanksgiving, we're going to hit Christmas, we're going to hit the New Year, and then it's full-on election season. So, again, it goes down to really where do the House Democrats decide to go with this? Do they go the distance? Do they try to force a trial in the Senate? Or at some point do they say, you know what, let's just let election season take over and let the voters decide next November what happens to this president?
Or maybe they combine the two, knowing that it's very harmful to a president to be on trial, in essence, during an election campaign.
I'm sure all of these different political decisions are being, thought of at the highest levels right now here in Washington.
Former federal prosecutor Joe Moreno joining me from Washington once again tonight. Joseph, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise, Carol. Happy to do it.